We accidentally saved a motorcyclist from a monster attack. You can believe it or not, this happened in Spain 2 years ago when I was 20. Returning home at night while I was the co-pilot, it was pitch dark, and I enjoyed seeing the road surrounded by darkness. We were overtaken by a motorcycle that I barely noticed at that moment. A minute later, while taking a turn, we saw the motorcycle lying in the middle of the road, and as my father tries to avoid it, we saw a motorcyclist who seemed to be under attack by an animal. When the lights illuminated it, we saw a creature with pale skin and too many legs on top of him. Before we could process what we had seen, that thing ran away. We waited in complete silence for a few seconds. The man was trying to stand up, but he was too frightened. My father told me to stay in the car and honk if I see anything. While he was outside helping the motorcyclist, I didn't see anything, but I felt like a prey being stalked. It's a primal instinct, so strong that I could hardly think of anything else. I couldn't hear well, and I didn't pay much attention, but I think my father offered to drive him to the hospital, and the man refused, which was strange. He didn't seem injured, just few scratch, so my father told him he could drive just ahead of us if he wanted. When my father opened the car door to get in, he stood still for a moment, looking at me before getting in. Nowadays, I think he was actually looking at my window, which terrifies me. The motorcyclist waved at us, started his motorcycle, and we followed closely until he took a different path. At first, I kept looking at the road just in case, but I was so scared that I decided to look at my feet for the rest of the journey. We haven't returned to that area since then. So that's it. Not a big story, but incredibly terrifying to me. I don't know what we saw because it was less than a second, but it was the size of a pony. And as I said, I saw more than 4 limbs. The scariest thing to me is that it moved too damn fast. My Alexa just did something weird. So I was just doing a workout, didn't have anything playing on my Alexa, didn't even speak to her once. Yet she started playing this heartbeat sound. It was incredibly creepy and slow. At first I didn't know it was her. I thought it was just a vibration from my tablet or phone or watch. But once I finished my workout, I went over to my bedside table to look for the source. It got louder the closer I got to it, and I wondered for a second if it was coming from the bathroom. So I checked that too before coming back to my room and looking at Alexa. I thought that there was no way it could be her since I never spoke to her, and she never said a single word to me during my workout either. But I checked anyways and put her against my ear. It's an Echo Dot, so it's small, and it was her. I asked her, "Alexa, why are you playing a heartbeat sound?" She lit up and listened, but didn't respond and just turned pink. After that, I told her to stop, and she did. But maybe I should have asked what she was doing instead. Doesn't matter now since she stopped now, just very random and creepy. The woman in the window. This is not my story, it's my boyfriend's. But I thought it was so creepy I have to share. My boyfriend grew up in a small town in India. He lived in a small gated community and he was at the end of the street. Next to his house was a forest. One night he woke up, took his blanket and pillow to the couch and turned on the TV. He then fell asleep. In his own words, he described what followed as an out-of-body experience, similar to a lucid dream. His consciousness seemed detached from his physical form, as if observing himself from a surreal vantage point. There he was, fixated on the television screen, which emitted nothing but a static haze. No TV show, no movie, just static. Strangely enough, he found himself transfixed. He then woke up and felt a wash of fear and quickly walked down the hallway to get to his bedroom. At the end of the hall outside of his bedroom was a window. He looked out the window and saw a woman looking back at him standing at the edge of the forest. I asked him what she looked like. He says she was tall, had black hair and was dressed in white. He said her mouth was hanging open. They stared at each other for a bit before he ran into his room. He fell back asleep, and in the morning he assumed it was all a dream, until he walked out of his room and saw his pillow and blanket in the same position on the couch and the static channel on. Man, that gave me the chills. The coincidence that scared me to hell. This happened around 5 years ago. I was working in a pretty decent hotel as a bartender, and part of our job description was to deliver room service to people or complimentary drinks, food, that the reception asked us to deliver. One night I got an order to the 4th floor through the reception. Now it is important that it was the 4th floor, because that was the only floor in the hotel that had no windows to the outside in the end of the hallways, or anywhere for that matter. It was also the cheapest floor, and it was not renovated in years to a point that there were boot marks on the walls, ceiling and patches of paint hanging from the ceiling as well. Other floors were well maintained. I don't know why that was the case. Anyway, on the end of each hallway, instead of a window, was a huge mirror almost the size of the entire hallway, which gave an illusion of an infinite corridor with the mirrors being on both sides of the hall. Halfway through the hallway in both directions were fire doors that were held by electromagnets from what I can tell. So there I go up to the fourth and to the end of the hallway where the room I needed to go to was. As I approached the room, I could hear people talking faintly because the door was open and light was spilling into the hallway. As I got closer, the talking stopped, and now I could only hear the static noise of a TV. I knocked on the open door and said, "Room service," but no one responded. I slowly walked into the room, knocking again. Got a few people scared a couple of times before, so I was being careful. But as I got inside, I realized the room was empty. At this point, I'm creeped out by the empty room, static TV, and fourth floor in general. I quickly put the drinks on the table and left. As I was approaching the fire doors, the lights on the floor went out and the doors slammed shut on me. Just as I was about to go through them, the lights went out only in the hall because I could still see the light from the room and hear the TV static, which was getting louder and coming from all around. I felt adrenaline rush through my body as I ran down the stairs, didn't want to wait for the elevator, and ran straight outside for a smoke. The fourth floor always creeped me out, but since that time I found ways not to go up there at night any longer. The floor itself got renovated about a year later and it became way less creepy, but I still had a weird feeling when I got up there. A stalker in the woods. Decided to drive to the largest forest in my county in hopes of getting back in touch with nature, needing to clear my head. I asked the local forestry office the best place for a quick walk off of the main trails and was directed to this picturesque spot a little ways down the road. No reception. With the rare bit of blue sky we get in the UK, I was glad I made the spontaneous trip. And as I walked further down the path, I saw a clearing in the trees to my right. Since the plan was to get closer with nature, I ventured into the trees off the beaten path. It was great. I explored the area, listened to the birds as they swooped from branch to branch, even got a good 5 minutes of meditation in, before I heard what sounded like two animals fighting. I assumed they were just foxes and moved on. I unexpectedly reached this sand road as I emerged from the trees, but decided to walk along it for a moment as I scanned for an entry into the forest on the other side of the road. But as I looked around, I spotted a bra dangling from a bush near the road. Now, I'm aware people go to the forest for all sorts of reasons, but this did put me slightly on edge. As I turned around, I heard an electric car making its way up the road. By the time I heard it, it was less than 300 yards away. My instincts told me to hide or just avoid being seen, but there was no time, so I simply gave a polite nod as he passed and made my way in the opposite direction. He parks up behind me, just out of view. I begin to make my way off of the road, intending to go explore further, but when I saw the car, for a moment, doing a 180 turn, then parking again, something told me to turn around and go back the way I came. As I made my way back onto the road, I spot this man in a white shirt behind the bush the bra was hanging from. He was going in the direction I just changed course from. I crossed the road and made my way back into the forest I had arrived on the sand road from. When I got slightly further in, I turned around to check if the man continued in the opposite direction, but he didn't. Instead, I see he has also crossed the road and is making his way into the part of the woods I entered. By this point, I knew I was being followed. There was no way he coincidentally went one way, then turned to head into this part of the forest that I entered. But I kept my pace brisk rather than running. My physical health can go south quick, my knees are brittle, and my ankles are weak. So rushing could cost me, especially since I still had to reach my car and drive away. As I traveled further, he was always following, was cursing my luck as I made my way to the end of that section of the forest, just before the path that was after a large patch of grass and shrubbery. But as I looked back, I couldn't see him. I stopped for longer than I should have, scanning the trees and listening intently. But I hear nothing, see nothing. I make my way back onto the path with some relief and turn one last time to check the tree line. When I see he's not there, I begin considering I was overthinking the whole situation. But just as those thoughts cross my mind, I see the man emerge from the opposite side from where he was previously. At the edge of the tree line, he just stared at me. But I wasn't going to take any more chances, so I made my way down the path and back to my car, making sure to get out of there quickly, as I knew he would have to head down the same tight country road. I reported the man to the forestry office, but there wasn't much they could do, so that was it. When I paused at the tree line, when I couldn't see him, for him to have emerged from where he did when I had made it back to the path, he had to have approached from another angle, an angle that I admittedly wasn't checking. But I'm glad I never went further into the forest. I'm glad I followed my instincts. Otherwise, the only way back would have been through him, and God knows what his intentions were. When things go too far. I'm sharing a very real and tragic story that happened to an old friend of mine about a month ago. Since the investigation and court proceedings are still ongoing, I'll be using alternate names to protect the privacy of the victims involved. The reason I know so many intimate details about the event is because my co-worker's fiancé was one of the detectives who was assigned to the case. Small world, huh? For a brief backstory, I met the victim through a mutual friend who I will call Mia. Mia and I became friends in college because we took several classes together. We don't share many common interests, but we have years' worth of history, jokes, and common experiences, which have kept us connected over the past several years since we graduated. Mia was heavily into fetish art, which was one interest we did not bond over. No pun intended. If you're unfamiliar with fetish art, it's where somebody dresses up in BDSM clothing for photo shoots, performances, and/or conventions. From what I know, Mia was not into BDSM play, but rather the artistic expression and aesthetic. I don't understand the appeal, but I don't judge her for it. To each their own. Back in college, Mia invited me to a university party where I first met the victim, who I will call Bianca. When I met Bianca, she was a stunning girl in her early 20s with an effervescent personality that only added to her glow. Bianca had this energy about her that immediately put everyone at ease, no matter the situation. I don't want to lean into stereotypes, but the prettiest girl in the room isn't typically the kindest or most welcoming, yet Bianca was all three. I learned that evening Bianca was also a member of the fetish art community, which is how she and Mia became friends. I ran into Bianca at a few more parties before we graduated, but we lost touch post-graduation. Mia and Bianca had remained good friends after college due to their involvement in the fetish art community. But Bianca had become very distant and reclusive over these past 7 months since she started dating her new boyfriend, who I will call Griffin. Griffin was terribly possessive, controlling, and emotionally and physically abusive. He would use BDSM as an excuse to abuse Bianca, but because Bianca wasn't allowed to communicate openly with her friends and family, no one knew how dangerous her situation had become. Flash forward to the present. I received a text from Mia on a Sunday asking if I remembered Bianca from college, which I confirmed. Mia then let me know that Bianca had been reported missing. Bianca and Griffin were supposed to attend an event together on Friday but never showed up. Some of the event attendants tried to contact Bianca, but no one could reach her. Shortly thereafter, Bianca's phone's location had been mysteriously turned off. People called and got a hold of Griffin afterward, and he said he had no idea where Bianca was and that he had been waiting for her to come home so the couple could head to the event together. Griffin's response was a major red flag since he always knew Bianca's location due to how controlling he was. Griffin would spy on and abuse her if she lied or tried to see her family without permission. He never allowed Bianca to go anywhere without him, so how would he suddenly not know where she was? Bianca's family was contacted very early Saturday morning and informed that Bianca had been missing since the night prior and suspected something terrible had happened. Since her family had to wait 48 hours from the time of her disappearance before filing a missing persons report, the police did not start investigating until Sunday. That is when Mia texted me the news. The detectives immediately went to Griffin's apartment, but he refused to grant the police entry without a search warrant. For whatever reason, Griffin was under the impression that the detectives wouldn't be granted a warrant, which is pretty ridiculous considering he was the only suspect. Because Griffin assumed his interaction with the police was over, he didn't attempt to flee. Contrary to his assumption, The detectives easily got a warrant, returned to the apartment, and found Griffin naked in the kitchen, wearing yellow rubber gloves and laying down a black tarp on the floor. Surrounding him were several tools, such as a bone saw, Lysol wipes, goggles, industrial tape, and vacuum-seal plastic bags. Also in the kitchen, the detectives found a blood-soaked duffel bag that smelled like, and I quote, "the most vile and pungent mix of feces, decaying fish, sulfur, and sweat." The detectives immediately arrested Griffin for attempting to conceal the murder of another person, which later became a charge of first-degree murder. As I'm sure you have guessed, Bianca's body was inside the bag alongside a bloodied ballistic knife, which Griffin purchased illegally. Bianca's head was decapitated, and her body was covered in various cuts, with shattered ribs and a broken trachea. If you're wondering why Griffin kept a dead body in his apartment for 3 days, I'll let you connect those disgusting dots on your own. Apparently, Bianca and Griffin had been engaging in BDSM play, and Griffin indulged in his deepest and darkest fantasies. Sadly, Bianca was on the receiving end of his evil. After Griffin's arrest, all of Bianca's friends and family discovered that Griffin was a registered sex offender and had already been incarcerated 8 times for sexual assault, drug and weapon charges, and aggravated assault in the span of 9 years. I look forward to knowing Griffin will spend the rest of his life behind bars when he gets convicted of his senseless and lustful acts. Bianca was a beautiful and pure-hearted person whose murder could have been prevented if her friends and family noticed all of the red flags and acted to rescue her from her situation. I will close my story with a simple call to action. First, please pay attention to the behavior of your loved ones. Sometimes people can't vocalize their desperate need for help, but there may be behavioral clues instead. Secondly, please always remember to do a simple Google search or a background check of your future partners before going in too deep to back out. If Bianca had simply looked up Griffin's name and history, she might have avoided such a gruesome and untimely death. I'm thankful that Bianca's beautiful light shined in my life, even though the duration was brief. I hope her family finds the peace and justice that they deserve. Rest in peace, Bianca.